are listening to the Thornapple Valley Church podcast. Thank you for joining us. Our hope is for you to be encouraged and to connect with God during this message. If you'd like to know more about Thornapple Valley Church, visit tvcweb.com.
Well, good morning. Hey, can we take a moment and welcome in our campuses in Delton, Middleville, and online? You know, this is a special day because we just got our kids back from camp. And like I said earlier in the service is that between the kids camp and our student camp, we had over 125 kids go to camp. So can we celebrate that? And all together, we've got about 19 getting baptized, about 17 or so because a few are out of town. So can we celebrate that kids making a decision to follow Jesus? And because baptism has been happening so often around here, we've actually had to kind of expand some of our facilities. So we bought a washer and dryer because we do it about 5 times. Here's a picture of the washer and dryer. We got that installed on Tuesday. So yeah, we're excited about baptism. And I'm excited about the series that we're jumping into, The Supreme Life. But let me start by asking you this question. How would you define living your best life? How would you define living your best life? Because how you define that will determine how much you're enjoying your life. Some people define living their best life as living a lucky life, where everything goes their way, when things fall into place. I would have to say that I'm one of the people who has bad luck. I don't have a lot of luck, but my wife, on the other hand, she has the most luck in the world. She just, you know, she finds money, she gets things, it's great to have a lucky wife when you're not lucky. But here's how some people kind of define their own experience of a lucky life. I'm going to just read you some stories that I came across this week in Reader's Digest. This one person says this: it was a hot July day when my family arrived at North Carolina's coast for a beach day. Upon arrival, my father was aware that he had misplaced his beloved sunglasses. We've all had that happen, right? We got everything, we got a plan, and then all of a sudden it's no sunglasses. Not much of a beach enthusiast, my dad remained quite dismayed that he would be able to read all day due to the loss of his sunglasses. My dad became so desperate that he looked to the sky and exclaimed, "God, if you care, please find me some sunglasses." A moment later, a small gleaming reflection washed ashore. Jumping to our feet, we ran to the sea, and what else washed ashore but a pair of coral-encrusted sunglasses? Isn't that cool? Here's another person. They said, "I answered a ringing payphone that was meant for another." Anybody remember payphones? I remember when I was in high school, I had a beeper. Anybody remember having a beeper in high school? Yeah. It was the dumbest device ever invented. I gotta go to a payphone. Anyway, this person says, "I was enamored by the angelic voice of a girl on the other end of the line. We spoke for what seemed like hours. She was from Iowa, I was from Florida, and I was spending the summer in New Mexico mountains. We immediately knew that we wanted to know more about each other, so we exchanged letters and became pen pal. 6 months later, she came and murdered my family." No, that didn't happen. 6 months later, I traveled to the Midwest to meet my mystery girl. It was love at first sight. In September, we will celebrate our 30th anniversary. That's luck. So next time you see a payphone ringing, answer that call. Anyway, all right, here's the last one. So one person said, "One day I was on a walk and I noticed a penny on the ground. I didn't bother to pick it up, and it made me wonder why. Because the sum was so insignificant, I wonder what would I do if I found $20, just keep walking, and sure enough on the corner lay a $20 bill. Long story short, I found its owner and returned it with a smile. And then a few hours later, I won a $25 scratcher. With my pockets a little deeper, I wondered what would I do if I found $1 million. I'll let you know. That's how they end the story. See, some people define a best life as a lucky life. When everything comes together, things work out, and it just works the way that I was thinking and dreaming and planning. For some of you, that's why you're frustrated right now, because stuff isn't coming together. You got this plan, you got this dream, and you feel like you're playing whack-a-mole, and this didn't work, and that didn't work. But other people would define their best life as a successful life. A successful life. You know, when I think about somebody who became a major success, I think about Eddie Dassler. Here's a picture of him. He's the founder of Adidas. He's a German guy, and he has this idea to make a shoe that would be more than just a shoe. To be a shoe that would capture athletes. And so he started talking to athletes, and in the late 40s, he created Adidas, and he became a major success. Or I think about Melanie Perkins. Here's a picture of Melanie Perkins. She's the founder of Canva. She was a student teaching and doing all this stuff. And then she had this idea, what if I can make a tool that made designing stuff easier for people? And now they have like 60 million users. Some would call their best life when everything goes their way. Others of us would define our best life is when everything goes our way because we make it go our way. But here's how Paul is going to define it. In Colossians chapter 1, here's what Paul's going to write. And I'm going to start in verse 15. Paul says, the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. So the Apostle Paul is describing Jesus, and he calls him the Son. When he says he's the firstborn of over all creation, he's not talking about the idea that Jesus was created, but it's a rank. He's in charge of all creation. He goes on to say, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and before him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that he might in everything have. Now, what's that next word? Come on. Say it like you went to Hastings High School or Middleville High School. Come on. Say it with me. Supremacy. That he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, so that through him to reconcile himself all things, whether things on earth and heaven, making peace through his blood he shed on the cross. Now, serious students of the Bible have thought that this is actually a hymn or a poem that Paul is writing about Jesus. So he's writing this book while he's under house arrest in Rome. And Paul is in this moment of struggle and disappointment, and he has a choice. Am I going to be frustrated and discouraged because things aren't going the way I want? Or am I going to make the most out of it? So he starts to pen this letter to a people in a place called Colossae. That was a really wealthy place. It was known for their purple dyes. Kind of like if you're from Wisconsin. Wisconsin is known for cheese. If you're from Louisiana, like me, it's known for marrying your cousin and crooked politicians. But I made it out. But anyway, here's the point. Paul is going to write to these people who's in his wealthy town while he's in prison and he's confined. He's limited. He can't do what he wants to do, and he has the opportunity to be frustrated at God, but he realizes that God's in charge of everything. And basically the point that Paul is saying is that your best life is not when life goes perfectly, not necessarily when you're always successful, but when you understand that the supreme life starts with Jesus, who has supremacy over all life. When you understand that the best life I can live is not an easy life, but a life focused on Jesus, who has supremacy over all life. This is why at the end of the chapter, he's going to write this, going back to Colossians chapter 1. At the end of the chapter, Paul's going to say this. He's going to say in verse 28, he is the one we proclaim, admonishing and teaching everyone with all wisdom, so that we might present everyone fully mature in Christ. To this end, I strenuously contend with all the energy that Christ so powerfully works in me. So Paul's saying, because Jesus is the supreme being who has supreme life, the supreme life is found in him. So I'm going to do everything that I can to help people experience supreme maturity. Supreme maturity. Because it's not just about knowing Jesus, it's growing in Jesus that you experience all that he wants to offer you, even in the midst of disappointments and setbacks. I wonder if we would have this letter if Paul didn't end up in prison. He's going to write 3 books, and we've studied them all summer: Philippians, Colossians, and Ephesians. And so Paul is going to go on to define the supreme life. But before he defines the supreme life, being supreme maturity, if there is supreme maturity, then the opposite must be true as well. There must be a such thing as immaturity. That's why Paul's going to write this. This is in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul says, brothers and sisters, I cannot address you as people who live by the Spirit, but people who are still worldly, mere infants in Christ. I gave you milk, not solid food, because you were not ready for it. Instead, you're still not ready. You're still worldly, since there's jealousy and quarreling among you. Are you not worldly, acting like mere men? So what Paul is describing, and he's not mad, he's just saying, here's my desire. My dream as a leader, as a church leader, is to see people reach their full potential. But if supreme maturity is the goal, then the reality is there must also be then what he describes right there as the immature. The immature. Those who made a decision to follow Christ, but they don't keep following him to growth. And then there must also be the partially immature. Now I get it. Some of you, maybe your aunt, uncle, cousin, niece, you came to see, a kid get baptized, and I'm just glad that you're here. But what Paul is describing is for us as Christ followers, when we decide to start following Jesus, doesn't mean that we become completely mature. There's a process that we go through. And I like to say, I've been a pastor for almost 25 years. And there's areas that I would say, man, I've got growth, maturity in, and then there's areas where I'm still growing in. If you want to know how mature a person is, a Christian is, here's what I would encourage you to do. Play basketball with them. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Get them under pressure. Because maturity is not how much I do this, it's how much I live this out when things aren't going my way. Paul says, hey, I want you to get to that place of supremely mature. That's the goal. That's the dream. And Paul says, man, I'm striving, I'm struggling, I'm putting all my energy and effort because I understand when you get there, you start to live this transcendent life. Not an easy life, but a life where you have peace, where you have hope, where you have strength. And here's how he's going to define it in this chapter. The first thing he's going to talk about is being outwardly productive. Outwardly productive. In verse 10, here's what Paul writes in verse 10. He says, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing forth good fruit in every work, growing in the knowledge of God. outwardly productive. It's this idea where throughout the century, Christians and writers have described the spiritual growth process as like a garden. He said the goal is to bear forth fruit in every good work. Every good work. Now, there's some good works that are fun to do. There are good works where, man, you're gifted to do, you feel good doing, and then there's those good works that stretch you, that challenge you, like forgiveness, kindness, to people who are harsh to you, walking in truth when there's a shortcut. Paul says, man, I want you to be producing your outer garden to have outward productivity. But then here's the second thing that he's going to say is outwardly patient. Patient. Look at verse 11. In verse 11, Paul says this. He says, being strengthened with power according to his glorious might, that you may have great endurance and patience. Now, I don't know how many of you pray for patience, but I would say I don't. I don't pray for patience because here's the truth about patience is that patience requires pressure. You don't have to be patient about something that doesn't stretch you or challenge you. But here's the truth about all of us. The greatest moments of our life, I want you to think about this, happen slow. The greatest moments of your life happen slow. Some of your greatest regrets happen quickly. You're in a moment, you're all, energized, and you saw an info commercial. They said, you need to buy this today. It's $1.99, and if you buy it in the next 10 minutes, we will give you another one for free. And all of a sudden, that impulse hit you, and you did it, and then you got that ShamWow, and you're like, why did I pay $199 for this? Because I wasn't patient. Patience is a process that requires pain and stretching and growth. And here's how you grow is you grow learning how to be patient. When I think about this, I think about meeting my wife. Me and my wife, we've been married for 18 years. We just celebrated our 18th anniversary in July. And I never forget my wedding anniversary because it's the day after my birthday. Sometimes my wife forgets, but I never forget. But anyway, I remember when I was in college, I had this vision, this dream, this goal. Here's what I found about great visions and dreams. They require great patience. Having a dream is incredible. Having an idea, something that's bigger than you, something that causes you to cry. And they talk about a vision is something that causes you to cry and bang the table. But it's not the size of your vision that will determine if you will get there. It's the size of your patience. Because if it's bigger than you, it's going to require growth in you. And I remember, so I had this dream I was going to get married. We were going to have kids. We were going to do all this stuff. I remember I was dating this girl, and then there came a moment where it was clear she wasn't the one. And if I'm being totally honest and totally transparent, I remember the night that we broke up, and I wasn't so sad that I was breaking up with her. I was sad because my dream wasn't going the way I planned. But I had this idea in my immaturity that here's what was going to happen. The day that I hung up the phone and broke it up with her, that the next day a supermodel was going to call me. And she was going to say, I'm related to Holly Berry. I'm her little cousin. And I just want you to know that God sent me to marry you and have your gorgeous babies. That was what I thought was going to happen. And what I want to tell you is that didn't happen. Instead, I got somebody so much prettier, so much better than her. I got my wife, Jennifer Marie Brown. She's singing here on stage, so I got to say that out loud. But, Jen, I love you. No, she's amazing. But here's what happened. 5 years went by, of being patient. Being patient. Working on me, stretching me, growing me. And then there came a moment where what was slow turned into something that was beneficial. Here's what I want to say to somebody right now who's frustrated at life right now. You might even be frustrated at God because you're like, God, I had this idea, I had this dream. You used to be a Christ follower, but you stopped following God because he let you down. And maybe he hasn't let you down. Maybe what he's doing is he's trying to develop great patience in you. Here's the third way that Paul is going to define this supremely mature life is inwardly growing in knowledge. Inwardly growing in knowledge. Let me go back to the verse here. He says in verse 10, he says, growing in the knowledge of God. Here's what's true about growth is that it requires effort. If you want to take notes, I want you to write down this statement. Change is unstoppable, but growth must be intentional. Change will happen in your life whether you want to or not. And according to the statistics, almost 70% of us hate change. We hate change. Hate when you go to McDonald's and they change the little package of your box. You hate change. But no matter how much you try to stop change, it will happen. But growth must be intentional. And here's where growth tends to happen in your life is when you're stretched. I remember when I was in college, my parents had given me a car, and then I remember the day that my car stopped going forward, it only started going backwards. And that was the day I realized, I think I need a new car. So my transmission went out, and I bought the first car. I paid $650 for it, and that was a ripoff. Every dollar over a dollar that I paid was a ripoff. When I bought that car, it had 245,000 miles on it. It caught on fire on the highway, and that was the moment I realized I think I need a new car. Well, I go down, I'm all like 21. I go down to the dealership, and there's two cars. There's one that I can kind of afford, and then there's one that's right within my budget. And the only problem is it's a standard. It's a manual. And my parents didn't teach me how to drive a manual. Well, I'm sitting there, and I had a roommate at the time, and my roommate said, if you buy this car, I will teach you how to do it. Well, I had no other choice, so I buy the manual car, and it wasn't quite ready, so they gave me a loaner, so he taught me in about 2 hours. So I'm driving, it would stall, I was driving it stall. And then the day that I went to pick it up on my own, there was this huge hill. Now, if you don't know how to drive a standard, if you ever want people to cuss you out, get stuck on a hill. It's a huge hill. And I'm driving that car, and all of a sudden that thing starts going backwards, and I start saying, Jesus, take the wheel. Please take the wheel. And people in Texas, they might be Christians, but they will cuss you out if you're not driving right. So I'm rolling down this hill, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. And then I eventually got it going up the hill. And then over time, the growth caused, here's what I don't want you to miss. What was scary and what was hard became something that I enjoyed and loved. And I love that standard shift, whereas today I have a manual, but I actually wish I had the standard back because this is my favorite kind of car. But it was the pressure, the change that required growth. Is it possible that God's trying to grow you? In some area where there's so much pressure and you're trying to get out of it, and what if God is trying to move you into a level of growth? How do you do it? Here's what I've learned is develop a personal spiritual growth plan. Here's what that looks like. If you want to move towards maturity, number one is you got to get in the right environment. Most of you have right intentions, you just have the wrong environment that pulls you down spiritually. Number two, develop and get around the right kinds of people. right kinds of people. Jim Rohn says that we are the sum average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And if you actually think about it, you know it's true. It's the people that you spend the most time with. They be able to transfer their thoughts and their values. But when you get around other good people who are not perfect, they start stretching you and you start growing. And then here's the last one, the right schedule. The right schedule. It's what you do regularly that determines who you are, not your intentions. And when you develop the spiritual growth plan, you start to grow. And you're not perfect, but you start to change a little bit. And the last time that you were under pressure, you said something that you regret, but because you've been changing your environment and you're changing the people that you're around and you're changing what you do, you find yourself getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. But then here's the fourth thing that Paul's going to point out is he's going to say inwardly being powerful. Inwardly powerful. Here's how he says it in verse 11. He says, being strengthened with power according to his glorious might. Inwardly, so my outer guard has patience and productivity, but it's because inwardly I'm growing and I'm learning to connect with God's power. And God's power gives me the ability to say no to the wrong things and yes to the right things. And then finally, Paul's going to say, here's what supreme maturity looks like. Inwardly being joyful and thankful. Inwardly being joyful and thankful. Here's how he writes about it in verse 12. He says, and giving joyful thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. What Paul says is God has an inheritance for you. Some of that's eternal. Some of that is what you experience on this side of eternity. And Paul says, here's why I'm so passionate about seeing you get to maturity. It's because you will not experience all that God has for you until you become everything that God has called you to be. And what does that look like to be joyful and thankful? Well, here's what I found. People who are thankful or joyful, and people who are joyful are people who are thankful. Because they don't just see problems and pressure and disappointment, they see possibility and opportunity. And so what Paul is saying, is Paul said, man, I'm praying for you that you get there. You know, around here at TVC, we say that our mission is to connect people with God. And one of the ways we do that is through our Next Step strategy. I'm going to have them put it up on the screen. I'm going to get real practical. Put up our Next Step strategy. And you would say, hey, I'm trying to figure out how to do this faith, God, Jesus thing. Well, we would say, hey, start with just coming on the weekend. You're going to see some students get baptized here in a moment. Maybe as you watch them get baptized, realize that's my next step. On September 15th, we're going to have a baptism for everybody across all campuses. We're going to have a huge parking lot party. Baptism. No, bring it back up if you don't mind. Then have a God connection. Then start to connect with other people who are going to help you grow. The other thing that we have going on, starting next week, is something called Starting Point. And Starting Point is a class to help you understand the foundational steps in your faith. Some of you are going, I need to get started. I want to be better. Listen, being better is not about your intentions. It's about taking active next steps. So here's my question for you. Is what kind of life are you willing to settle for? What kind of life are you willing to settle for? The best kind of life that God offers you? Are you willing to go after that supreme life, the best version of life? With that, I want you to pray with me. God, today I pray for the folks watching me in Middleville, in Delton, here at the Hastings campus online. God, I pray you would help us all to take our next step towards supreme maturity. We won't get there overnight. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Through your grace, your power. In Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen.
Thank you for for listening to the Thornapple Valley Church podcast. If you found this message encouraging, we invite you to share it. For more information, visit tvcweb.org.